just received a call. The client who was supposed to order 100 tons of steel has cancelled. The reason? Vietnam and South Korea have imposed new tariffs, specifically targeting the steel industry. It seems this tariff storm is no joke. The bitter chill in the steel industry is already upon us.
Just 10 years ago, Chinese steel was in high demand around the world, but now it has become something everyone is avoiding. Over 20 countries across Asia, Europe, South America, and North America are simultaneously building trade barriers to block the flow of Chinese steel. Chinese steel exports are on the verge of collapse. Let's start with Vietnam, which used to be China's largest steel export destination. Due to pressure from local businesses, Vietnam's government began imposing a temporary tariff of up to 28% on Chinese hot steel starting in February. By April, the tariff on galvanized steel was increased to 37%. The effects were immediate. Chinese steel exports dropped by 28% month on month, and the trade value shrank dramatically. Major companies like Bao Steel, An Steel, and Shougang were not spared. Their market share in Vietnam, which once accounted for 64 to 68% of imports, has rapidly declined. In March, Chinese steel factories saw their profits per ton of hot-rolled coil drop from $50 to a loss. Vietnam saw a wave of order cancellations. Bloomberg notes that while these measures are currently temporary, they are likely to become permanent tariffs in the future. Vu Tran, a former regional manager at Cargill, pointed out that when Chinese manufacturers can no longer dump steel at low prices, Vietnamese steel plants will finally be able to compete on cost. South Korea's response is even more targeted. In February 2025, South Korea's Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy imposed a temporary anti-dumping tax of up to 38% on Chinese steel plate products, which are mainly used in shipbuilding and construction. This tariff directly targeted China's largest steel exporter, Bao Steel at 28%, Shougang at 30%, and companies like Shantan Steel and Xiamen International Trade at 38%. After the tariff, China's thick plate exports to South Korea dropped by 14%. A month later, South Korea launched an anti-dumping investigation into hot-rolled steel from China and Japan, initiated by the South Korean giant Hyundai Steel. Vietnam and South Korea, the two largest markets for Chinese steel exports, together make up nearly 20% of total exports. With both of them now blocking imports, at least 6% of the 110 million tons in exports has vanished. India, the world's second-largest steel producer, has also shown no mercy. On April 21st, India's Ministry of Finance announced a 12% safeguard duty on certain imported steel products. The duty is supposed to last 200 days. This decision comes at a time when India has become a net importer of finished steel for the second consecutive year, with imports reaching 9.5 million tons, the highest in 9 years. The massive influx of Chinese steel has forced some Indian steel plants to cut production and even consider layoffs. India's steel minister Kumaraswamy stated that this measure will provide crucial breathing space for local steel plants, especially small and medium-sized enterprises. The European Union has also acted swiftly and decisively. On January 13, 2025, the European Commission imposed temporary anti-dumping duties ranging from 14.1% to 62.6% on Chinese tin plate and non-alloy steel products. In May 2023, the EU launched an anti-dumping investigation into Chinese tin plate, which led to an 18% drop in exports. Between January and May last year, it fell another 7.25%. Now, Chinese steel manufacturers are turning to Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and other markets. On April 1st, the EU reduced steel import quotas by 15%, leaving only 10 million tons of duty-free imports. Products exceeding the quota will be taxed at 25%. In 2024, the EU imported 60 million tons of steel, with China accounting for 5.6 million tons. Now, 5 million tons will face a 25% tariff, squeezing profit margins. The U.S. has set up an even stronger defense. The Trump administration not only imposed a 25% tariff on imported steel, but also set new standards for North American steel, requiring imported steel products to be melted and poured in North America. This has caused Chinese steel exports to the U.S. to drop to almost zero in certain months. Latin America has also launched fierce retaliatory measures. On March 24th, Colombia imposed a 41.7% anti-dumping tax on Chinese galvanized steel and plain steel plate, with a sky-high 94.64% on galvanized steel tiles, which will be in effect for 5 years. Mexico imposed a 50% tariff on steel. Chile imposed a 35.4% tariff on steel balls and 24.9% on steel rods. Brazil raised its tariff from 10.8% to 25%. Standard & Poor's predicts that China's steel exports will experience a sharp decline of 15 to 20% in 2025, compared to last year's peak of 110 million tons. Bloomberg's industry research bluntly states that about 50% of China's steel exports are now blocked by trade barriers. Data shows that Chinese steel exports have been continuously declining, with April exports falling by 10 to 15% month-on-month. The month-on-month decline in March was mainly concentrated in Indonesia, India, Thailand, and Vietnam, resulting in a widespread market contraction. China's steel traders are now trapped in a deadlock, with an impossible trade guerrilla war unfolding around the world. In the past, Chinese steel could quietly be labeled as Vietnam-made or Thailand-made to easily bypass tariffs in Europe and the US. Now these countries have seen through the trick and set up nearly impossible to evade origin certification systems, tracking steel products with DNA-level precision. Chinese steel now has no place to hide. Chinese steel has been encircled from Asia to Europe and across the Americas. The defensive chain is nearly flawless, presenting an unprecedented challenge to China's steel exports. The global crackdown on Chinese steel has dealt a heavy blow to the industry, while the domestic market has long been riddled with problems. In the first half of 2023, signs of a crisis in China's steel industry became clearly visible. Half of the listed steel companies fell into the red. According to the China Steel Industry Association, the average profit margin of large steel enterprises dropped sharply from 3.8% in 2022 to just 0.9% in 2023. By the second half of 2023, the situation worsened drastically. Ansteel posted a loss of 1.16 billion yuan, Benxi Steel lost 1.24 billion yuan, Chongqing Steel lost 980 million yuan, Anyang Steel lost 1.03 billion yuan, Ma'anshan Steel lost 890 million yuan, and Bayi Steel lost 1.07 billion yuan. Especially notable was Sansteel Minmetals, which saw a dramatic 578% drop in performance, losing 664 million yuan, setting a historic record. The company began freezing recruitment, canceling year-end bonuses, and even cutting back on basic equipment maintenance. At the start of 2024, the steel crisis fully erupted. In January of last year, 75 of the 201 steel production companies in the country, along with 115 blast furnaces, had ceased production. The operating rate for small and medium-sized enterprises dropped to just 75.5%. By June, the reduction in construction steel production had reached 3.36 million tons in just 1 month, far exceeding the total reduction of any previous quarter. In July, an internal report from the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology admitted that the steel industry was facing unprecedented overcapacity. National crude steel capacity had reached 1.26 billion tons, while domestic demand was only about 850 million tons, leaving an excess of over 400 million tons. This excess is equivalent to the total annual production of the second to the 10th largest steel producers in the world, enough to build 300,000 Eiffel Towers or lay steel tracks around the Earth's equator 90 times. In August last year, Dongling Group, the leading steel company in China, announced bankruptcy and restructuring, leaving 18,000 employees without jobs. By September, panic spread throughout the market. The price of Chinese construction steel fell below 3,000 yuan per ton, a 6-year low. This was far below the previous average of 3,800 to 4,000 yuan per ton. A trade association revealed that this price was below the cost line for most steel plants. In January this year, Jiangsu Delong Nickel Industry Group, the world's second-largest stainless steel producer, declared bankruptcy and restructuring. Meanwhile, 32 steel companies paused production for maintenance, but in reality, they were struggling to survive. From Hebei to Liaoning, steel plant closures became increasingly frequent. The most shocking news came in February, when an alarming report spread within the industry. Baotou Steel, the largest steel company in the Northwest, forced drivers from its logistics subsidiary, Steel Union Logistics, to take out personal loans in their own names to obtain credit limits, using the company as a guarantor to pay for transportation costs. One driver helplessly commented, "If you don't sign, you don't get work. If you do sign, you fear you can't pay it back." This desperate measure of borrowing from employees has shifted the crisis of a broken financial chain to the lowest level workers. Industry Association statistics showed that since 2024, more than 150,000 workers in the steel industry have been forced to leave their jobs or accept significant salary cuts. By early April, steel prices were still hovering around 2,900 yuan, nearly 500 yuan lower than the same period last year. Several major steel mills, including Zhongtian Steel and Wugang Limited, had started maintenance and production reduction mode, essentially controlling inventory to prevent prices from crashing further. By mid-April, the latest data from the Chinese Steel Industry Association showed that 65% of the industry was in the red, and the survival rate of small and medium-sized steel companies was less than 60%. An industry insider predicted that if exports shrank by another 15 to 20% and the domestic market can't absorb the steel, at least 50 small and medium-sized enterprises will shut down in the coming year, leaving 300,000 workers unemployed. This 2-year-long steel industry crisis, from the initial subtle signs to the current full-scale collapse, highlights the severe consequences of China's overcapacity. The entire industry is still desperately searching for a way out, but the severe environmental pollution, overcapacity of 400 million tons, and the global tariff siege create a triple dilemma, indicating that this crisis is far from over. Faced with such a severe industry crisis, a fundamental question arises. Why are China's steel prices so low? This selling at a loss model is clearly unsustainable for the industry, so why has it persisted for so long? China's steel prices are shockingly low, even by global standards. In the first quarter of 2024, the average export price for China's hot-rolled coils was $480 to $520 per ton, while the price in Europe was $650 to $700 per ton, and in the US it reached $750 to $800 per ton, an astonishing price difference of 30 to 40%. Even in India, another developing country, steel prices are 15 to 20% higher than in China. This unbelievable low price has caused global steel manufacturers to complain. Behind the price mystery lies a shocking industry secret. China's annual steel production exceeds 1 billion tons, with a value of 8.7 trillion yuan, yet it only generates profit of 29.1 billion yuan. That means the average profit per ton of steel is less than 30 yuan, not even enough to buy cigarettes. The entire industry's profit margin is only 0.33%, far below the international average of 5 to 8% for steel industries, and even less than a tenth of China's manufacturing industry's average profit margin. This number becomes even more absurd when looking at the 2023 financial reports of China's major steel companies. Baosteel's net profit margin was only 1.2%. Ansteel reported a loss of 1.16 billion yuan. Banxi Steel lost 1.24 billion yuan, and Bayi Steel lost 1.07 billion yuan. The entire industry is hovering near the break-even point, with some months even showing overall losses. It's hard to believe that this is a normal, operating business sector. It seems more like a government project. Knowing that they're losing money, why do steel enterprises continue to produce? And knowing about overcapacity, why does the government allow steel plants to expand production? The low prices are primarily driven by overwhelming labor cost advantages. The average monthly salary for Chinese steel workers is only 3,000 to 5,000 yuan, while American steel workers earn the equivalent of 39,000 yuan per month, and Japanese workers earn about 21,000 per month. According to data from U.S. steel research institutions, labor costs account for only 3.5% of total costs in China's steel industry, while in the U.S. it's 18%, in Europe it's 14.5%, and in Japan it's 12%. This huge gap directly translates into a price advantage. The externalization of environmental costs is the second major factor. In China, the steel industry's environmental investments account for only 2 to 3% of total costs, while developed countries like the US, Japan, and Europe allocate 7 to 10%. For every ton of steel produced, China emits an average of 2.2 tons of CO2, higher than the global average of 1.9 tons and much higher than the EU's 1.5 tons. This saving on environmental costs directly translates into a price advantage. A 2023 World Bank report estimates that if environmental pollution costs were fully internalized, the price of Chinese steel would rise by 15 to 20%, bringing it closer to the global average. However, these environmental costs haven't disappeared. Instead, they've been passed on to the residents living near steel plants and to the entire ecosystem. For example, in Tangshan, Hebei, medical costs related to air pollution amount to 12 billion yuan annually, which is not included in the production costs of steel. Local government subsidies are a core pillar in maintaining low prices. These subsidies take many forms and are often hidden. Land prices that are 20 to 30% below market value, industrial electricity costs that are 30% lower than market rates, actual tax burdens that are only 60% of nominal tax rates, and inter-subsidized loans, among others. According to partial statistics, the Chinese steel industry received over 320 billion yuan in both explicit and implicit subsidies in 2023, nearly 11 times the industry's total profit. A Ministry of Finance expert in China anonymously revealed a shocking fact. If all subsidies were removed, 70% of China's steel enterprises will go bankrupt within a year. While this statement hasn't been officially confirmed, it highlights the importance of subsidies to the industry. These subsidies have effectively become the lifeline for steel enterprises. Steel also holds a special strategic position as the foundation of military construction. The Chinese military often says that the steel produced by a steel plant in 1 year could build 300 Ford-class aircraft carriers, reflecting the central role of steel in national defense. According to estimates from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, China's military-industrial system consumes about 80 million tons of steel annually, which accounts for about 8% of total production. To ensure the supply of raw materials for military purposes, the government is willing to provide substantial subsidies to keep the steel industry running. The steel industry's massive employment effect is another key factor that the government cannot ignore. In Hebei province, for example, direct and indirect employment in steel and related industries exceeds 6 million people, making up over 16% of the province's total workforce. A large steel plant with an annual production of 10 million tons directly employs around 10,000 to 15,000 people, and the indirect employment could reach 50 to 80,000. If large-scale steel plant closures occur, it would lead to serious unemployment and social instability. Local governments prefer to subsidize steel plants, even if they continue to operate at a loss, rather than face large-scale unemployment caused by closures. The impact would not only be felt by steel workers, but could also affect 5 to 6 times that number in downstream industries. No local official is willing to bear this consequence. Having lost mainstream markets in Asia, Europe, and the US, Chinese steel exporters have turned to secondary markets in the Middle East, Africa, and South America, only to find that this whack-a-mole game is a losing one. Countries like Egypt, Nigeria, and the UAE have raised their steel import standards, requiring more complex origin proof and quality certifications. With no way out, some large steel companies have accelerated their going-out strategy, building production bases in Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Bao Steel Group has invested 5 billion yuan in Malaysia to build a comprehensive steel project with an annual output of 3 million tons. Hebei Steel Group's project in Serbia is also speeding up, and Ansteel has invested heavily in a nickel-iron cooperation project in Indonesia. However, this path is fraught with risks. First, there's the pressure of enormous investments. A modern steel plant can cost over 10 billion yuan. Then there's the long construction period, usually taking 3 to 5 years before production starts. More dangerously, with the rise of global trade protectionism, these overseas plants also face the risk of policy changes in host countries. This means that after billions of investments, local policy shifts can bring it all back to square one. In 2018, the U.S. suddenly imposed a 25% tariff on imported steel, causing several Chinese steel companies that had invested in the U.S. to lose everything, a lesson that now seems to have been forgotten. What's even more concerning is that these overseas investments mostly come from state-owned enterprises, which carry a significant risk of state-owned asset losses. Some overseas steel projects have already exceeded their budget by more than 40%, and part of the funding's destination remains unclear, leaving room for severe rent-seeking behavior. As China's steel exports are blocked, the global steel trade landscape is undergoing profound changes. Traditional steel powerhouses like Japan, South Korea, and India are reclaiming lost market share. India in particular stands out, with its steel exports growing by 38% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2025, quickly filling the market gaps left by China. A more important change is the reshaping of trade rules. Implementing trade restrictions on grounds of national security is becoming the new norm, and global trade is shifting from cost first to security first. Over the next decade, global supply chains will be restructured around allies rather than the lowest cost. This isn't about economics, but the inevitable result of geopolitics.